Following the victory of the Islamic Revolution in 1979, Iran extended full support to African liberation movements. Nelson Mandela, the late South African anti-apartheid revolutionary leader, visited Iran in 1992 to express his appreciation to the Islamic Republic for its support. Mandela was clearly pleased to meet the leader of Iran's Islamic Revolution.
My leader, how are you?
Hello, I'm Mubarak Kenya, and a warm welcome to this week's edition of Africa Today, which is focusing on how the Islamic Revolution in Iran inspired liberation movements in Africa and how African people continue to get inspired by Iran's resistance to Western imperialist countries. Stay with us till the end of our show as our analysts discuss this subject. And don't forget to send us your views as you watch our show today.
Islamic Revolution inspiring Africa. Most countries in Africa, just like Iran, have experienced exploitation of their resources by European and American colonialists. After the victory of Iran's Islamic Revolution in 1979, liberations movements in South Africa and Namibia looked towards Iran for inspiration in their struggle for independence. The victory of the Islamic Revolution coincided with an era in which apartheid was at its height in South Africa and the masses were resisting the racist regime. Oliver Tambo, the former president of the ANC in exile, was among the first to send words of congratulations to Imam Khomeini after the victory of the revolution. Part of the message stated that the ANC joins all progressive humanity in the celebration of your achievement and welcomes the new Iran into the ranks of the anti-imperialist and anti-racist community of nations. We salute the heroic Iranian people. During his visit to Iran April 2016, the then South African President Jacob Zuma stated that Iran occupies a special place in his country's struggle against apartheid.
Iran occupies a special place in our history of struggle in South Africa. Iran was at the forefront of the fight against apartheid, pledging solidarity with the South African people and cutting ties with the apartheid regime.
The Islamic Revolution in Iran also inspired Islamic and even non-Islamic movements in Africa. Sheikh Ibrahim Zakzaki, the incarcerated leader of the Islamic movement in Nigeria, explains here on the impact of Imam Khomeini's thoughts on other movements.
Also, the revolution has taught us about the power of people. It has impacts elsewhere outside Iran.
Now, for more analysis on the impact of Iran's Islamic Revolution on the liberation movements in Africa, we have contacted Said Abdullah Husseini, the director of the Islamic Center for Africa in Johannesburg, and Bukangesa, an activist and commentator based in Nairobi. We shall also be joined later by Suhaila Zakzaki, the daughter of the leader of the Islamic movement in Nigeria, Sheikh Ibrahim Zakzaki. Now, thank you all for joining us. We're going to start off with Said Abdullah Husseini in Johannesburg. Our first question to you now, can you briefly tell us how the Islamic Revolution inspired the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa?
The Shah regime had a very close ties with the South African regime and supporting, and they had also oil business, and the Sasol in South Africa was owned by Shah, but some portion of that was owned by Shah, and a lot of other things to that extent that even the father of the Shah died here in South Africa and he had a palace here. Well, all of these has made the people in South Africa to hate the Shah regime the same way that they hate the regime of apartheid. So when the Islamic Revolution in Iran started, they have realized that they have got a support. And when the Islamic Revolution in Iran was victorious, they have come to conclusion that if Iranian managed to get rid of Shah, definitely they also can get rid of the apartheid regime.
Thanks for that, Mr. Husseini, and stay tuned for more.
The Islamic Revolution greatly contributed to the eventual victory of the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. To practically show how he valued Iran's contribution to his country's liberation, South African anti-apartheid leader Nelson Mandela visited Iran after his freedom, even before becoming president. When he met the leader of Iran's revolution, Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei, he addressed him as my leader. Let's take a listen.
My leader, how are you? Well, it's an honor and a real pleasure for me to meet the leader.
During his time as the president of South Africa, Nelson Mandela reiterated his country's diplomatic independence as he welcomed the then Iranian President Ali Akbar Hashemi Rafsanjani. During the state visit in 1996, Mandela categorically stated that no country can choose friends for South Africa.
We form our friendships on the basis of principle, and those who are with us when we're all alone will continue to be our friends. And the fact that any particular country may be their enemies does not influence our attitude.
Now, Mr. Husseini, South Africa has continued to enjoy close ties with Iran after the fall of the apartheid regime. Now, how did Iran's support for the anti-apartheid liberation movement impact on the present ties between the two countries?
Well, from before the time of their victory in 1994, Iran was one of the Islamic Revolution was one of the countries which they were supporting unconditional the struggle in South Africa. They were supporting PAC, they were supporting ANC. There was close ties between the Islamic Revolution and the people who were in South Africa doing struggle. And even Nelson Mandela, before victory, after he was released from jail, he had a travel to Iran, and also some substantial aid also has been received by the by ANC. And after 1994, then they officially opened their embassy, which was an intersection before, and from that time they are enjoying a good relationship together.
Now, speaking when he hosted President Zuma, Iranian President Hassan Rouhani referred to Iran's assistance to the South African liberation movement after the 1979 Islamic Revolution.
مردم ایران در دوران مبارزه مردم آفریقای جنوبی در برابر آپارتاید همواره در کنار مردم آفریقای جنوبی و حامی آنها بودند. از آغاز تشکیل جمهوری اسلامی ایران به فرمان امام راحل امام خمینی رحمت الله علیه صادرات نفت به رژیم آپارتاید قطع شد و همکاری‌های اقتصادی ما با اون رژیم متوقف شد و از زمانی که فعالیت دولت پسا آپارتاید در آفریقای جنوبی فعالیت خودش آغاز کرد و کنگره ملی آفریقا قدرت رو در دست گرفت، جمهوری اسلامی ایران همواره روابط بسیار صمیمی و نزدیکی با جمهوری آفریقای جنوبی داشته.
Now, Mr. Husseini, can you elaborate on why the liberation movements in South Africa and Namibia found the Islamic Revolution inspirational?
In spite of the international sanctions, Iran was continuing to have a close ties with South African regime, and they had relationship. This was something which the people in South Africa didn't like from the Shah regime. So when Iranians wake up and started their revolution against Shah, this was an inspiration to the people of South Africa in the South African region, in the Southern African region, actually, Namibia and Zimbabwe, other places, all of them, they have been inspired by the Islamic Revolution, because they were saying, if Iranian managed to get rid of Shah, we are also able to get rid of the apartheid regime in South Africa.
Thanks for that insight, Mr. Husseini. Now, don't go away. We shall be right back to talk more about how Iran's Islamic Revolution inspired various freedom movements in Africa.
Islamic Revolution inspiring Africa.
We are back again as we analyze how the Islamic Revolution in Iran inspired and continues to inspire freedom movements across Africa. Now, a popular Islamic awakening movement, also known as the Arab Spring, swept across the Arab world from early 2011. Tunisia in North Africa was the cradle of this movement that touched off a chain of uprisings across many Arab nations. Well, there is no doubt that this popular awakening drew inspiration from Iran's Islamic Revolution. Mr. Husseini, in your opinion, how did Iran's Islamic Revolution inspire the Islamic awakening or the Arab Spring, which started off in Tunisia?
From that time, the Arab world realized that we cannot trust our leaders. And they were waiting for a spark. And that spark started from Tunisia and then went to Egypt and went to other countries. And having all of these were under the effect of Islamic Revolution, who was calling for the decline of Israel and the demolition of Islam, the apartheid regime in Israel. So in this way, they have been in the same way that the Hamas was inspired by the Islamic Revolution, the same way that Hezbollah in Lebanon has been inspired by the Iranian Revolution. They did manage to get rid of the Israelis from Lebanon. The people of region also, they have realized that they have power and they are able to deal with their regimes.
Thanks for that, Mr. Husseini. Indeed, power is in the hands of the people. Now, in your opinion, what are some of the weaknesses that made the Islamic awakening movement in North Africa fail to fully replicate the success of Iran's Islamic Revolution?
Well, that is also something to be discussed because in fact, the Arab Spring didn't start from Tunisia. The Arab Spring was actually highlighted there. But the Arab Spring actually started when Mohammed Morsi of Egypt, after him becoming victorious in an election in Egypt, he didn't close his relationship with the Israelis, and they wrote a letter to the president of Israel asking him calling him my esteemed friend, and assure him of continuation of relationship between Egypt and Israel. From that time, the Arab world realized that we cannot trust our leaders. And they were waiting for a spark. And that spark started from Tunisia and then went to Egypt and went to other countries.
Let's move on to West Africa, where Iran's Islamic Revolution has inspired millions of people in this region, which has a rich and ancient Islamic civilization. The Islamic Movement of Nigeria is a popular organization led by Sheikh Ibrahim Zakzaki, currently being detained by authorities since 2015. In late 2015, Nigerian forces brutally attacked Zakzaki's residence in the city of Zaria in Kaduna State and the followers of the peaceful Muslim movement that he leads. In one of his speeches, Sheikh Zakzaki expounded on some of the reasons that led to the success of Imam Khomeini's movement.
Soviet Union collapsed because it was based on false narration. What do you think of what you may call Western ideology, capitalism? Will it survive? Is it based on true narration? Narration of the reality of things. The reason why Imam succeeded is he has based his teachings on true narration of what is truth. Truth is message of Almighty Allah to entire mankind through his messenger.
Now we are joined by Suhaila Zakzaki, the daughter of the leader of the Islamic movement in Nigeria, Sheikh Ibrahim Zakzaki. Thanks a lot for your time. Now, the leader of the Islamic movement, Sheikh Zakzaki, has also been called Africa's Imam Khomeini. Can you tell us how Iran's Islamic Revolution and its leader, Imam Khomeini, inspired Sheikh Zakzaki?
First of all, I believe that, the Islamic Revolution of Iran has inspired my father greatly in so many ways. I recall him telling a story of how his first introduction to who Imam Khomeini was, which he told me was in a class. It was during a class when he was in university, and one of their teachers was discussing the subject of influence versus power. And they were trying to explain how certain people might not hold power and have a lot of influence. And that particular teacher cited Imam Khomeini as an example. And he said that Imam Khomeini was the story of Imam Khomeini, just as brief as it was in the class, was quite memorable. And so that was his first introduction to Imam Khomeini, when the discussion of his influence in Iran, around the time when, he was being cracked down on by the previous Iranian governments.
That's quite an interesting insight on how Imam Khomeini influenced Sheikh Zakzaki, who went on to form the Islamic movement in Nigeria. Thanks for that, Ms. Suhaila.
The victory of the Islamic Revolution gave impetus to the nascent Palestinian liberation movement. Palestinians have been struggling for decades to free their land from Israeli occupation, and African governments have been at the forefront of supporting Palestinian liberation. However, before 1979, the masses in Africa rarely participated in rallies to express their support for Palestine. Now, every year across Africa, masses come out massively to express solidarity with Palestinians during the International Quds Day. This day is a legacy of the late founder of the Islamic Republic, Imam Khomeini, who designated the day in solidarity with Palestinians.
Because of we coming from an apartheid situation, the world also did steps like this in support of us. And because of so many marches and BDS movements worldwide, we fought and we broke apartheid. It's important for us to show solidarity with Palestine, because an injustice to one person is injustice to everyone worldwide, and we cannot separate ourselves. We do not live isolated in a world. We cannot keep quiet in the face of injustice. So it's important for us to highlight this, to educate people and to expose what is happening.
Let's now move over to Bukangesa, a pro-Palestinian activist and political commentator based in Nairobi, Kenya. Thanks for your time. Now, African civil society groups have been organizing the masses to mark the annual International Quds Day in solidarity with Palestine. How did the Islamic Revolution inspire African masses to come out and publicly express support for Palestine?
African people have been, historically being brutalized by colonial and now neo-colonial forces. They draw a lot of inspiration from the consistency in the foreign policy of Iranian people that has been pro-people. For example, we have seen the Iranian people showing their solidarity, the Iranian government showing their solidarity with the oppressed masses in Africa, particularly during the apartheid regime in South Africa. So it's indeed that we also see that the Iranian people have a clear and consistent and even independent policy that is pro-people, and that to us we see it as a big win for all the anti-imperialist and of course anti-Zionist forces that reside here in the global south and elsewhere in the world.
Very well put there by Bukangesa. Resisting Western imperialism is the only way for Africa to attain real independence. Now, as an African inspired by Iran's Islamic Revolution, what message do you have for the Iranian people?
You know, the Persian history that is anchored on the spirit of resistance that is continuing to inspire the Iranian people and to continue to refuse, the policy of the thugs in Washington. So African people know this, and they know that to defeat the colonial forces, then it meant a protracted warfare. It was not, a policy of surrender. So we want to pass revolutionary greetings to our Iranian brothers and sisters and tell them that they have the revolutionary credentials, they have anti-imperialism credentials, and even standing tall against the arrogance of the United States of America. And particularly, we are very proud of the Iranian people winning trust across the board.
And just to add to what Mr. Angesa has said there, Iranians have had long and historical ties with the people of Africa for centuries, even before Western colonialists arrived in the continent. Back to you, Ms. Suhaila Zakzaki. Now tell us, what lessons do you think can be learned from Iran's Islamic Revolution?
People looked at religion for the most part as something that was backward, as something that was potentially limiting people who adhered to it. And at the very least, even if it didn't limit people, it was only seen as more of a private thing between people and God, and that was it, and nothing more. So the Islamic Revolution of Iran did come and shatter those perceptions, and definitely showed that Islam can be something beyond that and is something beyond that in all its complexities. The fact that it managed to achieve an Islamic government, an Islamic Republic of Iran.
Thanks for that, Ms. Suhaila Zakzaki. Now, Mr. Husseini, you have the last word in our show today. As we know, Iran inspired the liberation movements in South Africa and Namibia. Now, 42 years after the Islamic Revolution, Iran is now a powerful country and has attained self-sufficiency in many sectors, despite crippling sanctions. What lessons can African countries learn from Iran in terms of relying on their own resources to attain desired development goals?
The African Union, the African countries must wake up. How long they allow the European and the Western countries to come and take their sources and don't share any of the wealth to the African people.
Well, you have it there. African people must rise and aspire to attain true economic independence for this great continent to prosper. Iran has and will always stand by the people of Africa in their quest for progress and true independence. With that, we come to the end of this week's edition of Africa Today. Thanks a lot for watching and making Press TV your channel of choice. On behalf of my colleagues, it's goodbye for now and take care.